Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I'm going through a series of video presentations I'm creating based off the slides as we start into our second book, Murox JavaScript and jQuery. This will be the second book for the Rankin Technical College AWD Application and Website Development 1000 Web Development Technologies class. Now I already have gone through the chapters in Murox HTML5 and CSS3 4th edition text. And now I'm starting on the second one. So as you can see in here, the first chapter is pretty much a replication of what we had already covered. So I'm going to go over it, but I'm going to go over it fairly quickly. All right, it's an introduction to web development. So let's get going. What I'd like to do now, because I've already gone through this chapter, is to just concentrate on the stuff in here that's JavaScript specific. Okay, so we've already seen this. These are the components of a typical web application where the internet is kind of the cloud, so to speak. And again, what has changed over time is rather than this being a desktop, this being a laptop, this being a desktop, you can see this is probably a desktop, but we've got tablets and smartphones that are put into the picture. Some of the terminology you should know. You, as a user, you're the client. When you put something into your address bar, you are communicating with the web browser. When you put in a URL into your address bar and you hit enter, you're trying to communicate with a web server over some kind of a network. All right? And intranet is kind of an internal network. We have an intranet here at Rankin Technical College. All right, with that intranet, we're able to talk and share information between instructors at all three of our campuses. Now, here at the Wentzville campus where I work, we have a local area network, probably several, but where the machines in the room are, for lack of better words, connected to one another. All right. We do not have a direct connection between the machines here, for example, in St. Louis, because that's about 40 miles. It wouldn't make sense to run cable like that, so we have a wide area network. All right. So the internet is basically a collection of WANs and LANs. And the people who provide service for you on the internet are your internet service providers. All right. What we concentrated on in the last book was a static web page, where, again, you came in, you made a request, and basically the web server fulfilled it. HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is typically the way that this is done. But now we're going to be getting into more dynamic web pages. All right, where we'll bring in additional servers. That'll be transparent to us, basically. All right, but a dynamic web page implies that somewhere along the line you are doing some work where you want to be able to take things and update them while the program is running. Here's an image or web page with swaps and rollovers. You probably have seen these. So notice this is Land's End. So when you highlight here, it shows there. If you highlight it here, this would become the blue one, etc. So how does JavaScript fit into this? JavaScript is one of the things that can be returned along with HTML. All right, JavaScript is a scripting language. It is a full-fledged programming language, but it's basically a scripting language. All right, JavaScript has changed over the years, but when it first came out, it was basically kind of an add-on, for lack of better words, to web pages. We'll talk about jQuery in this book, all right, which is a JavaScript library. We'll talk about client-side processing. Some of the uses for JavaScript and jQuery, we'll go over these. Data validation. We showed some validation when we went through the form chapter, whatever that was, chapter 9, 11, whatever the heck it was. But we did that using HTML. You can also do validation using JavaScript. We'll talk about that. You've already seen a little bit of image swaps and rollovers back here, right there. And we'll also get into how you can use them for slideshows. Now, it's kind of important to realize, just so you're aware of this, and this is something I'm going to tell you, but it means little to nothing in the main scheme of things, and that is that whereas HTML, hypertext markup language, and CSS cascading style sheets are basically under the domain of the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, JavaScript is under the domain, so to speak, of the ECMA, which is the European Computer Manufacturer Association. All right? So it's a different governing body, although I don't want you to have the mistaken impression that the W3C has nothing to do with it. All right? So I think that, I don't know if 7 is out yet, but I know that ECMA script 6 is out. All right? But we'll look at things like strict mode, JSON, and a bunch of these other things that are here. I'm not going to read these to you. We probably won't get into stuff like promises because it's really complex stuff. The other thing that I want to mention to you too is just so you know this, and that is that although I plan on doing 18 lectures on here at least, one for every chapter, there's no way in heck if we go through 20 chapters in the HTML book that we're going to have time to go through 18 chapters in this book. That's 38 chapters over 16 weeks, which comes out to almost 2.5 chapters a week. I don't think that's possible to do it and then give you the depth and breadth of coverage we need to give you. So here's an HTML file in a browser with no CSS. So it's a simple form that hasn't been formatted. All right, they format it and boom. All right. Now, is that a big thing? No, but here is, they're talking about adding JavaScript. JavaScript, I don't care that if you call it a scripting language or you don't, it still has programmatic ability. You can write if statements, you can write switch statements, you can write for loops, you can write while loops, you can write do while loops. I'm going to go through all those and what those mean. Now here's some JavaScript code. I don't expect you to look at it and have any of it make a lot of sense. This right here is using what's called an alias. So we're able to use the $ rather than having, $ followed by something in parens rather than having to type out document.getElementById with the thing in parens. All right. This is grabbing information from these text boxes right here. First two. All right. And this says if the first text box is empty, give it an error message that says this field is required. You'll see that it's not empty. Then this one says if the two are not equal to one another, write down this entry must equal the first entry. And you can see that it does. All right. We also check the last field. And if there's nothing in there, we say this field is required. And you can see we've got that right here. So the JavaScript is working in unison with the HTML and with the CSS to let us achieve what it is we're trying to do. All right. Now again, we looked at these. This is what a lot of the last textbook was about. We've looked at headers, main, section, article, aside, nav, figure, and footer. That's not my intention to go through this stuff. That's why I'm zipping through it. Now, one thing to realize when we go through these, we're going to start adding to anything we want to manipulate programmatically. We're going to add an ID to it. Not a class, but an ID. All right, so we can use that document.getElementById that we looked at before. All right. You saw when we worked on CSS that there were different ways that you could add CSS. You could add it inline right into your code, typically in a span tag. You could do it internally, which means you use style tags right inside the file HTML file you were working on, or you could do it with an external file. In much the same way, we're going to do the same kind of thing. We're going to do the same kind of thing with JavaScript. So we can put it in line, all right, or we can make it internal on the page, or we can make it external in its own file, which will end with a .js extension. All right. We will look through this. We will learn how to use the console panel to go and debug our program. All right. So if we do this to get error messages, there's a better example here. You're all going to run into this. Everybody does. All right. I'm going to use Chrome for basically for everything I'm using. You'll notice in here, I don't know if we brought this up, what it would give us as far as these things for this HTML5 test. Whoops. I have no idea. I don't know if I've ever even gone out to this site, but I'm going to try it anyway. Well, our browser is even higher than it was previously. It's 504 out of 555 points. Now, if I do the same thing and I bring up Firefox, didn't like that, did it? I need it from here. There it gives me 491. If I bring this up in Internet Explorer, remember the higher the value, the better. So in Internet Explorer, it's 312, so that's probably about as bad as it gets. And if we bring it up in Edge, $492. All right, 492 in Edge, 312 in Internet Explorer, 491 in Firefox, and then finally in Chrome, 504. That's the one that I'm going to be using. All right, not because it scores the highest, but because I like it the best as far as functionality, etc. Okay. We'll talk about this HTML5 shiv and exactly what that means in just a bit. All right, we've already talked about normalize. All right. Oh, as it says here, there's shiv is also called shim, but it contains features that will run properly in older browsers. So the idea is that if you are running in, for some reason, in IE6 and you put in a feature that the system doesn't understand, the program will blow up. The stuff that's used in here, all right, cross-browser compatibility. This will become even more apparent when we get to jQuery. The idea that your page and will look and function the same, even in different types of browsers. The shiv I just mentioned, normalize we looked at earlier. CDN is a content delivery network, which will become more important when we get to talking about jQuery. All right, I'm not going to go over Aptana. That's what this book uses. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Aptana, but as I believe I mentioned to you already, rather than Aptana, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. Okay, that's it for Chapter 1. Don't want to save it. When I come back in just a moment, I'll be going over Chapter 2, which is getting started with JavaScript. So I'll be back with that presentation in just a couple.